He was already on his knees by the time the second patrol car pulled up. I want you to picture that for a moment, because I know how it sounds. A man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of guy who coaches Little League and brings banana bread to the neighborhood block party, standing in his son's living room at 11:30 at night with a 210-pound man, face down on the hardwood floor, both wrists pinned, breathing slow and even like he was waiting for a bus. The deputy who came through the door first was young. Couldn't have been more than 26. He looked at me, then at the man on the floor, then back at me. "Sir," he said carefully. "Were you on the job?" I told him no. He looked at my hands, at the angle of my stance, at the way I'd already moved 3 steps back from the subject without being asked, giving him room to take control. "Military?" he said. I just nodded. He didn't ask anything else. But let me back up, because none of this started that night. It started about 4 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon in September, the first time I met my son's girlfriend. My name is Robert Calhoun. I'm 58 years old. I live alone in a single-story house in Bozeman, Montana, which I bought after my wife Sandra passed cancer 7 years ago now. We had one child together, my son, Marcus. He was 32 at the time this story takes place, working in commercial real estate in Denver, and he had been dating a woman named Caitlin for about 6 months before he called to tell me he was in love. I want to be honest with you. I was not the kind of father who said much. Sandra was the talker in our family. She was the one who remembered every birthday, who knew which of Marcus's friends had what kind of home life, who could read a room in 3 seconds flat. I was the one who showed up, fixed things, stayed quiet, and hoped that was enough. For most of Marcus's life, I think it was. What Marcus didn't know, what I had never told him in any detail, was what I did before I became the guy with the banana bread. I spent 22 years with the United States Army. 18 of those years were with military intelligence. I did not carry a weapon into most of the places I went. My job was to read people, to understand what they were not saying, to find the lie inside the truth before it could do damage. I was good at it. I was very good at it. I retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2013, moved back to Montana to be near Sandra while she was sick, and somewhere in the process of grief and quiet and chopping wood every morning, I became someone who neighbors described as gentle. I didn't correct them. Marcus never asked many questions about my service. That was my fault, not his. I didn't encourage it. When he was growing up, I was gone more than I was home. And when I was home, I was learning how to be a father instead of an officer. And the two didn't always translate. Sandra was the bridge between those two versions of me. When she died, I think Marcus and I just stayed on our own sides. So when he called me about Caitlin, I drove down to Denver that September to meet her. And I watched. She was beautiful in the way that makes you nervous. Not her face, her energy. She was charming in a way that had an edge to it. She laughed too quickly when Marcus said something she didn't agree with. She touched his arm when she was redirecting what he said. She looked at me with eyes that were doing math. I noticed. I said nothing. You have to understand something, friends. When your child is an adult, your job changes. You don't get to run background checks on the people they love. You don't get to pull them aside and say, I read people for a living and something is wrong here based on a Sunday afternoon. You wait. You watch. You stay close enough to matter if something goes wrong. That's what I did. Marcus and Caitlin got engaged 14 months later. I flew down for the proposal dinner, smiled, hugged her, and told her I was glad she was going to be part of the family. I meant the second half of that sentence more than the first. They were married on a Saturday in June, 2 years ago. Sandra would have cried. I stood in the back of that church and held it together and gave a toast at the reception about what it means to love someone for the long run. And I was talking to Marcus the whole time. Not Caitlin, even though I was looking at both of them. The first year of their marriage seemed fine. Marcus called every couple of weeks. He sounded happy, mostly, but I started to notice small things in our phone calls. He would start a sentence and stop. He would mention a plan he'd had a camping trip with an old college friend, a long weekend in New Mexico, and then a week later, casually mention it hadn't worked out. He stopped bringing up his friend group in conversation. He stopped mentioning his buddy from work, a guy named Phil he used to talk about constantly. I asked once about Phil. We kind of drifted, Marcus said. I didn't push, but I started keeping notes. Not written down, I don't do written notes. In my head, dates, patterns, the specific words he used when he was deflecting versus when he was genuinely unbothered. That's what 18 years in intelligence does to you. You can't turn it off. You just learn to keep it quiet. About 8 months ago, Marcus came up to Bozeman to see me alone for Thanksgiving weekend. Caitlin had gone to her sister's, he said. He seemed lighter the moment he walked in the door, and that lightness itself was information. We spent 3 days fishing and watching football and eating whatever I could put together in a kitchen that Sandra used to run. On the last night, Sunday, after dinner, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a beer and was quiet for a long time. "Dad," he said finally, "do you ever feel like you're not sure if something's wrong or if you're just being too sensitive?" I sat down across from him. "Tell me," I said. He talked for an hour and a half. He talked about the way Caitlin managed their money. He earned it, she controlled it, and he had an allowance. An allowance. He was 32 years old with a six-figure income, and he asked his wife for permission to buy new running shoes. He talked about the way she spoke to him in front of her friends, the jokes that landed just a little too hard, the way she'd grown cold to every person in his life until he'd slowly stopped seeing all of them. He talked about the way an argument would begin always over something small, always when he'd done something without checking with her first, and how it would escalate in a way he couldn't follow, until somehow he was the one apologizing, every time, for things he didn't fully understand. He wasn't bruised, there was no mark on him. But I know what damage looks like, and I was looking at it across my kitchen table. I didn't tell him what I saw. He wasn't ready to hear it. What I did instead was say, "Marcus, I want to set something up with you, something just between us." He looked at me with the same expression he'd had at 9 years old when I'd taught him how to read a compass. Skeptical, but curious. "If you ever send me a text that just says the word Monday," I told him, "I will know that you need me there, no questions asked. I'll be in the car within 5 minutes. You don't have to explain anything." He laughed a little. "Dad, that's..." "Humor me," I said. He agreed. He probably thought it was something from a movie. We didn't talk about it again that weekend, and he drove back to Denver on Monday morning, and I stood in the driveway watching his car until it disappeared. That was November. In March, on a Tuesday night, my phone lit up at 10:47. One word. Monday. I was already in my boots by the time I finished reading it. I want to tell you something about fear, because I think people misunderstand it. Fear is not the thing that makes you freeze. Real fear, the kind that comes from loving somebody, is the thing that makes everything very clear. The noise in your head goes quiet. Your body remembers things your mind has spent years trying to forget. I have been in rooms where the air itself felt dangerous, and I have learned that the only way through that kind of fear is to move carefully, quickly, and without wasting a single thing on panic. I was in my truck by 10:49. Denver is 7.5 hours from Bozeman without stops. I made it in 6 hours and 40 minutes. I called Marcus 3 times on the drive. No answer. I called once from a gas station outside Cheyenne and left a message. Just, "I'm on my way. I'll be there soon." I called Caitlin's number once, from a burner phone I keep in the glove box, old habit, and let it ring twice before hanging up. I didn't want her warned. I didn't want anything to change before I arrived. I pulled onto their street at 5:23 in the morning. The lights in the house were on. I sat in my truck for 4 minutes. I watched the windows. I watched the door. I watched the silhouette that moved across the downstairs curtains and recognized the posture. It was Marcus. He was moving the way people move when they're trying to take up as little space as possible. I got out of the truck. I knocked twice, then used the key Marcus had given me the previous Christmas. The entry hall smelled like something had been broken. Not literally, no glass on the floor, nothing overturned. But the air had that particular quality, thick and electric, that comes after a long night of someone making the atmosphere unsafe. Caitlin was on the couch, arms crossed, the expression on her face, the kind that has finished being angry and moved into something colder. Marcus was standing in the kitchen doorway with his hand on the frame like he needed something to hold on to. When he saw me, something in his face collapsed in relief and then immediately tightened back up. "Dad," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "I was in the neighborhood." He almost laughed. That almost killed me. Caitlin looked at me. "Robert, I don't know why you're here, but this is between Marcus and me." "I understand," I said. "I'm not here to interfere in your marriage. I'm here because my son sent me a message. He was being dramatic, she said. Her voice was very controlled. In a different context, you might have called it calm. We were having a disagreement. At 5 in the morning, I said. People argue. They do, I said. Can I ask what started it? She stared at me. Most people, when they're used to controlling the temperature of a room, do not know what to do when someone enters who has no interest in the temperature. That's private, she said. Marcus, I said, without looking away from her. Do you want to go get your go bag and put it in my truck? There was a pause, a long one. I heard Marcus's breathing change behind me. He's not going anywhere, Caitlin said. Her voice had moved into something sharper now. Okay, I said. Marcus, you can stay if you want, but the bag offer stands. I heard him move down the hall. I heard the closet. I kept my eyes on Caitlin. She stood up. She was a small woman, but she had a way of using space that was meant to be intimidating. I don't know who you think you are, she said, walking into our home. I'm his father, I said. I used to do this for a living. Not the family part, the reading people part. I paused. You're very good at what you do. I want you to know I've seen it before. I want you to know it doesn't work on me. She looked at me with something that might have been curiosity or might have been recalculation. He'll come back, she said. He always does. That's possible, I said. Marcus came back down the hall with a duffel bag over his shoulder. He was wearing his jacket. He had his keys, his wallet, his phone. He had packed it. He had already packed it before he sent me the text. My son had been planning his exit and didn't know how to start it alone. Let's go, son, I said. We walked out the front door. I didn't touch Caitlin. I didn't threaten her. I didn't raise my voice once. Some people will tell you that the most powerful thing you can do in a room is lose your temper. That's wrong. The most powerful thing you can do in a room is make clear that you don't need to. We sat in my truck in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on Colfax Avenue, and I bought Marcus the worst coffee either of us had ever tasted, and he talked for 2 hours while the sun came up over Denver. He told me things he had not told me at Thanksgiving. He told me about the year before, about the way she had taken over every financial account and explained it as organization, about the way she had called his employer twice he'd found out recently to complain about his schedule, interfering with their family plans, about the panic attacks he'd started having in the parking garage at work, about the emergency inhaler on his nightstand that hadn't been there 3 years ago. I listened to all of it. I did not say, I told you so. I did not say, I noticed this 4 years ago. There is no version of that conversation that helps anyone. What I said was, none of this is your fault. I want you to hear me say that clearly, because you are going to argue with it internally for a long time, and I want to at least be the first voice you heard say the true thing. He looked at his coffee cup. I feel stupid, he said. You fell in love, I said. Intelligent people do that with the wrong person all the time. People who study this for a living do that. It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. You would never have let this happen to you. I thought about Sandra, about the years I was gone, the things I missed, the ways I showed up too late or too quiet, about the fact that I sat across from him at Thanksgiving and watched him describe his own erosion and still waited because I was afraid of overstepping. I have made every mistake a father can make in the other direction, I said. The difference is just which mistakes I made. He looked at me then, really looked at me. I think it was the first time in a long time. What do I do now? He said. Today, you come home with me. You sleep. You eat something that isn't diner coffee. You let yourself breathe for 48 hours. After that, we find you a good attorney and a good therapist, in that order. And you make the next decision from a place where you're not running on no sleep in someone else's house, with someone else deciding what you're allowed to feel. He nodded slowly. And Dad? Yeah. Why did you come up with the code thing? Back in November? I was quiet for a moment. Because I know what it's like to need someone and not know how to ask, I said. And I knew that if I gave you a door, you'd walk through it when you were ready. You just needed to know the door was there. We drove back to Bozeman on Wednesday. Marcus slept most of the way. I drove and listened to the radio low and watched the mountains come up in the windshield and thought about Sandra, about how she would have handled all of this better and faster and with more grace than I had and how she also would have told me that getting there eventually still counted for something. I believe that. I'm working on believing that. In the weeks that followed, Marcus stayed with me. He hired an attorney, a good one, recommended by a friend in Denver who handled exactly this kind of case. He started seeing a therapist every Thursday afternoon. He filed for legal separation in April, and Caitlin contested it initially, and then, in May, she did not. He moved back to Denver in June, into an apartment downtown, 2 blocks from his office, with a gym in the building and a coffee shop on the corner, and no one controlling whether he was allowed to use either of them. I drove down to help him move in. We put together a bookshelf from a box with instructions in 3 languages, and neither of us could figure out which was which. And we laughed about that for 10 minutes, and it was the best 10 minutes I've had in years. Before I left, he walked me down to my truck. It was a hot evening, the kind Denver gets in June where the light turns everything gold. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Yeah." I asked Phil if he wanted to get lunch next week. I looked at him. He said, "Yeah," Marcus said. I nodded. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was small, and I didn't say anything, because some things don't need words. I drove home with the windows down and the radio up and the whole long, empty state of Wyoming spread out in front of me, and somewhere around Casper I thought about what strength actually is. It is not what I did in the Army, though I am proud of that. It is not the ability to control a room or read a face or arrive somewhere at 5 in the morning without anyone hearing your truck. It is being the person your child believes will answer when they send one word at 10:47 at night. It is making sure they know the door is there. It is driving through Wyoming in the dark without knowing what you'll find on the other side, because not going was never a real option. If you have a child, grown or otherwise, and something in this story landed somewhere true for you, I want to say one thing before I go. Set up your code. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be complicated. One word, one emoji, one wrong text that means "I need you" and I don't know how to say it. Give them a door. You may never need it, but if you do, you'll be very glad it was already there. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone you love isn't dramatic, it's quiet and consistent. It's building the kind of trust where they know, without a doubt, that one word from them will put you in motion. Robert didn't save Marcus the night he drove through Wyoming in the dark. He saved him the night he sat at that kitchen table in November and said, "The door is there." That's the whole lesson, really. Keep the door open. Make sure they know it. A small note for you, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment while carrying a lesson that we hope feels genuinely true.